Yo, what is going on, everybody? It's Brave Cat here once again with another Frontier Signals update. So stay tuned for the end. I've got a couple of interesting things to mention here. But going into the space weather and earthquakes and all that lovely stuff here, we've had only, random small flares here, none of them going above the M-class range. And we've still had some stuff regarding these coronal holes. So there's a much larger one that is in view now. So that one is probably going to have quite an enhanced coronal hole stream coming from that when it does start to face us. And it doesn't look like the solar wind has really gone down all that much. It picked up with those coronal hole streams and it's only gone down slightly. But, the magnetic aspects over here have been holding pretty strong. So the BZ hasn't really gone any south and the phi angle is also relatively stable. So let's see. There hasn't really been too much going on with the sunspots here. So when we take a look at those here, this central facing region right here is the only one that's really very notable. So it's got, not really much complexity, but, you have both polarities of the magnetism in those umbral cores. We compare that to the one down here where we really only have one type of polarity and the other regions are pretty small. And it doesn't look like there's any other sunspots really coming into reach here, but on the very far side of the sun, there does appear to be a pretty large and dark sunspot over there, so we'll see how that develops and what happens to it by the time it comes over to the visible side. So overall, things have been pretty stable here, not too much to really report on. And then when we go into earthquakes, well, that's where things once again are developing in interesting ways. So take a look at the tremor map where once again we see a lot of different slow slip movements happening far north as well as far south over here in North California. And when we take a look at things on Earthquake 3D, there has been some pretty crazy developments going on here. So we're looking at things in the last, 5 days or so. Almost the last week, and we've had some new activity popping up mostly in the North Pacific now, so it seems like things have mostly resolved down here despite the fact there's new deep events, and most of the notable activity going on right now is going to be over here in Europe and over here in the States. So just today we've had several developments here. So there's a couple of noteworthy fives going on either side of this plate. And now we have a cluster development. We've had a cluster developing over here off the west coast, right between Washington and Vancouver Island. And so I saw this and I was like, oh boy, here we go. So I don't really think this is necessarily foreshock events because it's kind of spread out over a larger area. So either way, we do have some sort of cluster happening here, which is definitely one of the bigger developments to be happening. So again, I think this is still going to be a pretty long and drawn out process. We're talking about a stretch of land going almost thousands of miles. So it's not going to happen quickly. But, this is a little bit concerning to see this sort of cluster going on up here. So I'm going to have to see what some other sources are saying about this. But, this could definitely lead to some larger activity around here. Hopefully not the big one, but, as things are, that's kind of an inevitability. And, we've had the same tremor locations being hit. So, that's why also like the fact that this exists right here by San Francisco and has been ongoing for months now also kind of spells the same story here. So things could be starting to break on the north side of the plate, and those effects could definitely cascade down here as well. Still the same stuff going on in Texas and even right over here. Various things happening. So we've had, pressure has somewhat resolved over here, and now we see the other side of the Pacific taking the rest of the pressure here. So South America has also had some fairly equidistantly spaced events. So we got a 3 up here and 3 down here. And then taking things over into Europe here, once again, we still see, again, the same ongoing disturbances here. So overall, there's just been a whole lot of unrest in the same areas, which again is a little bit concerning because, once these things are prolonged like this, it could definitely cause some major shakeups in these areas here. We've already seen large activity striking here kind of out of nowhere with the deep, deep 7 that struck here, and, all sorts of other stuff going on. So definitely gonna keep my eyes peeled on this area. And, if something big does happen, wouldn't really be too surprised about that. Taking a look at things over here in Italy in particular, things have pretty much quieted down, so there's no noteworthy swarms happening at the volcanic locations, which is good. But there has been other volcanoes going off as well, including the one over here in Japan, Sakurajima. So we got some footage of that here. It's a pretty breathtaking sight here. Looking at the ash plume coming out of there. So, this one is taken pretty much right below where the ash cloud is going over, and that is just such an immense area there, and such a huge cloud of ash coming out of that. And there's many similarly sized blasts going on right now. So it looks like pretty much the whole ring of fire is pretty much going off here. And we also have had a couple of typhoons. So New Zealand just experienced one a couple days ago. And it looks like that one has actually pretty much dissipated. So we go down here. Well, my voice is dying right now. Sorry about that. We go down here, and it looks like this typhoon is pretty much dead, and it's kind of moved on. But we have another typhoon here, so it's a Category 5, just out here in the middle of the ocean. Doesn't look like it's going to be making any sort of landfall, so it's not really anything to fuss about, but, it is another pretty big system going on there. And just to kind of wrap off the volcano discussion here, there's the volcano there, and throughout Indonesia and Central and South America, there's a lot of similarly sized ash plumes going on in the 7 to 15,000 foot range, with a couple of them going up into the 20,000 foot range. So things have taken a slight uptick there. And the last thing I was going to cover here, so there's this really good video I would recommend. I'm going to have the link in the description about data centers behaving like acoustic weapons. And what this basically means is the infrasound that comes out of these data centers, which, there's other things that produce infrasound, just think like heavy machinery, anything like oil wells, or plenty of other things produce infrasound, but it seems like data centers in particular produce very, very loud infrasound that is below the decibel range that, people can hear normally. And so there is a lot of studies and research going into how that infrasound actually impacts people's mental and physical state, as well as even spiritual related things. So this one is pretty damning evidence that data centers are not good, and there does not seem to be any precautions or regulations trying to mitigate the effects that these things can have on people. And it's not just, mental or, anxiety. These are actual like physical symptoms that are having nausea, general discomfort, or worse, even like children having seizures, and, the list goes on. So it's pretty crazy what is coming out. And of course, these are independent studies. These are not paid by institutions to do these studies, because, well, what do you think, some paid studies would be finding about data centers? They would not be coming to the same conclusions. So I would highly recommend checking that out. But anyways, that will wrap things up for today's update. So I hope you all enjoyed, got something out of it. Please like and subscribe for more, Share this video if you dare, and as always, I'll catch you all in the next.